Hi, I'm Christy Friesen. And you know what I thought would be kind of a fun idea? I have written several books, and this is one of my favorites. And I thought it would be a good idea if I just read it to you. Now, I know you can read your own book, sure, but there's something wonderful about listening to the melodious sound of my voice while I tell you what I wrote. And also, I might have some extra thoughts along the way, which is always kind of fun, right? I like a little commentary on a video or something like that. So, why don't I read this to you? And I'll intersperse it with pictures from the book because there's lots of pictures in the book, and we can just enjoy it together. How does that sound? All right, so if you want to get yourself something fun to drink and something to nibble on, and let's begin. The name of this book is Do You See What I See? And it says it's part sketchbook, part travel journal, part creative guidebook. From seeing to making, a hands-on look at creativity. Doesn't that sound like fun? All right, there's some stuff in the beginning with copyright stuff. That doesn't matter. And then a really fun picture of me with my weird eyeballs. Oh, and as I go through, I'm going to tell you the page numbers. That way, if you are looking at your own PDF when you're trying to find something, you can remember where to go if you wanted to go back and find that particular information. Also, when we were making the layout of this book, up at the top of each page, there's little title things up there, and I'll read those to you as well. So page 2, do you see what I see? What's that supposed to mean? Well, I think creativity is all about seeing. We all go through life seeing things, of course, but do we really see things? Do you see the pattern on those leaves? The repetition is soothing in an energetic way, don't you think? Do you see the way the colors blend in those radish slices, like little neon veins of energy? Do you see the wonderful impossibleness of that flower seeming to be so heavy that it will drop to the ground, and at the same time, seeming to be so light that it will gently float up into the sky and out of sight? And do you see that old stone carving? Why is that zombie bird on the beast baby's head? Are they friends or what? Page 3, from seeing to making, a hands-on look at creativity. When you see things like these, do they immediately start up the process of creativity in your brain? That's definitely what happens to me. So much so. I think about what I could create with patterns like those leaves, a brooch maybe, or what if I made a sculpture of a person with a body like that flower, slender and weightless? Oh, those eyes, those crazy bird eyes. Gotta do something with that. So here's a little sketch. There'll be sketches throughout the book as well. So I kind of sketched out what I was thinking when I saw that bird. Eyes kind of looking out, but not really matching, an oversized head, little dangling hands, or maybe flippers, kind of leaning. What if we add a different kind of a tail for stability? So I'll have sketches like that throughout as I share with you when I see things, what my creative brain starts coming up with. This is my brain all the time. I suspect I'm not normal, but then again, normal is highly overrated. It's interesting to me to look at things and then be able to hatch an idea from my brain through my fingers and into existence. I suspect that this process may be interesting to you as well. That's what this book is all about. I'd like you to see what I see and get inside my brain a little and create with me. I have ideas to share, creative nudgings, and suggestions, and even explanations with some step-by-step pictures of techniques and things to make. Because I travel across the country and around the world looking at things, I thought it might also be fun to share some of those observations and adventures, in case they amuse you and make you think of something creative to do with the shared experience. And interspersed throughout are sketches that I've made along the way. Make of them what you will. So it's my hope that this book, part travel journal, part sketchbook, part creative guidebook, may enlighten your artistic journey. Let's see what we can make together. And then just a little blurb at the bottom. This book is about making, but if you're unfamiliar with the material or process, don't worry. I've got all kinds of information in the back of the book for easy reference. Okay, so a lot of these things I'll do a spread like this, where I develop a theme, and then it spreads out over the double page. So I'll try to show you those as we go along. This one is I See Circles, page 4 and 5, around and around and around and around and around. Do you see what I see? I see circles. There's a whole bunch of them here. I like the circle as a design form. A circle has balance and calmness. If things radiate out from the circle, there can also be energy and movement. A circle is complete. It is also never ending. All in all, a pretty good shape to use it as an inspiration. I think that whenever I see circles, they sneak into my subconscious brain and wait for a moment to pop out in my creations. For example, the way the petals overlap to form a circle in this plumeria flower, which just happens to be one of my favorite flowers, definitely influenced the way I chose to overlap the petals in this little polymer clay composition. And I have a little sidebar there, actually too, stuck in a circle somewhere in Yokohama. Isn't that a cool sculpture? It was just on the side of the road somewhere. I don't even know why. And then the little sidebar is you can make a patterned petal easily by pressing a flattened oval of polymer clay into a texture sheet and then peeling it off. Use a bit of mica powder on your fingertip to brush some shine over the surface of the texture. Just a little note, if I didn't say so earlier, I primarily am a 3D artist where I work in a lot of clay material like polymer clays and epoxy clays. So most of the things you'll see in here as examples have to do with those materials. I work in other things, and those of you watching may work in other materials as an artist. So just extrapolate whatever I'm showing you into your material of choice. But if you're a 3D artist, you'll probably get a lot more out of some of the references and suggestions that I have. Taking a walk underneath an installation of Chihuly's glass see-through circular forms was behind the desire to explore colored see-through circular pieces. This one was made from resin mixed with glass frit and poured into a mold. Here are two metal manhole covers. One I spied in London, or noticed in London, the other I spied with my little eyes in Tokyo. What would they inspire you to make? I don't know yet exactly what they'll lead me to create, but I suspect that they had something to do with the fact that I often use epoxy clay to connect stacks of round metal components to make little flowery medallions. And there you can see one of them. Here's a little creative suggestion. Make a circular ring shape out of polymer clay and then wrap different colored clay sheets around it. How many variations could you come up with? A never-ending amount, I bet. And there's a little sketch. Another little idea that you could do with another circular ring and maybe put some little brooches, make it into a brooch by putting some little cut slices of flowers, or make some three-dimensional flowers. Or what if you did cut paper and you did a circle like that with little flowers on top, almost like a wreath? Now this one is, I see spirals. Spirals are a lot like circles. This is page 6 and 7, by the way. But they bring a feeling of journey to a design. A starting place and then an unfolding towards a destination. That can be a powerful statement. Or it can just be kind of fun, spinning around and around. And there I have a picture caught in a spiral with my child Lexi at a convention center in Milwaukee, center lobby. It happens sometimes, but it's okay, we got out. Do you ever do spirals as a kid, just spinning around and around with your arms wide out, making ever wider, increasingly lopsided spirals until you fell down laughing? I'm pretty sure that's a metaphor for something. But that's a little bit how I feel when I use spirals in my art. You should try it. The art thing, not the falling down thing, although both are fun, actually. So here are some spirals to inspire you. And these are just different things that I've made, from sketches to polymer clay pieces. And I especially want to bring your attention to this particular picture right here. And that one is part of a larger piece where I combined a lot of things. This is a thing I do a lot, is I use polymer clays and epoxy clays to create assemblages, and with a lot of mosaic elements to it. And this particular clump I love because I had this carved jade spiral, and then I had this metal piece that has all kinds of spirals and stuff, and very Viking and Celtic looking. I don't even know where I got that from. And then I found another little spirally thing that was like a toggle, also made out of metal. So then I just started adding much more circles and spirals onto that whole little cluster. And I think they look really fun together, don't you? So spirals are one of my favorites. Spirals are one of the oldest abstract designs made by us humans. Did you know that? It's cool, right? You can find them on lots of ancient things in pretty much every culture. Some of my favorites are the weird spiral dance party on that big stone at Newgrange in Eastern Ireland. That one is about 5,000 years old. And the more organized spirals found in various ancient stone buildings in Malta. Same time frame. So I assume spirals were totally trending in the Neolithic era. So let's look at some spirals and think about how we can use them in our own creativity. Page 8. Balance is good. The spiral is a wonderful way to bring balance to your artwork. One of those elements of design you hear so much about is balance. And one of the types of balance is radial balance. This is a type of balance that is achieved when the elements of the design all radiate out from a central point in a circular fashion. Sound like a spiral to you? Could be. Here's some. Gilt and wrought iron fence I saw during my meanderings in Paris. I love the gold and black together, don't you? An ancient Roman mosaic floor in Malta. Micro mosaic inlay, one of the many tucked away all over the place in the Louvre. An Art Deco architectural detailing. Who knows where I saw this one, but it's pretty, huh? A lamppost in Dublin, obviously. Look at all those shamrocks. Creative suggestion. Make something using a spiral with black and gold. I suggest using real gold leaf if you can. It is so delicious. Page 9, Viva la ham and cheese. Fun foodie fact. Okay, I just want to make a mention here. Throughout this book, there will be little fun foodie facts like this spread all around. That's because I love food. I love the taste, the mouthfeel, the smell, all the cool things. I mean, you can tell by looking at me, I enjoy the pleasures of tasting things. So they'll be sprinkled all throughout because one of the joys for me when I travel is that I get to experience food flavors from all over. And I'll share as many of those with you as I do in this book. We'll find out. Fun foodie fact. Spirals are delicious, like these fancy croque-monsieur sandwiches I gobbled in Paris. Vive la ham and cheese. Okay, let's make a polymer clay spiral. Simple, really simple. Number 1, condition some clay, polymer clay. I often use more than one color, so I'll have a striped spiral. Number 2, with your fingers, roll out the clay into a snake. Roll more at each end to taper them into a point. Note, if you did use more than one color, now is the time to gently twirl the snake in your fingers and wind up the colors into a spiraling stripe like a barber pole. 3, pick up the clay and gently roll one end into a loose curl. You don't always have to make a loose curl. Roll up the snake tighter for a more compact spiral. So what can you do with the spiral? Let's see. Page 10, inspirations and suggestions. There's a whole bunch of them here. Here are some ways that I've used spirals in my artwork. Maybe you'll get some good ideas to use yourself. Another little commentary is that I, in this book, use almost exclusively suggestions from my own artwork. I mean, I'll put in some other art that I've seen in museums and other things as we go along, but all of the stuff is my own art. Now, in some books, I have collaborated and added imagery from other artists. I love what other artists do, but this particular book, I used examples of my own work. I don't even know why, I just did, so that's the way it is, okay? All right, here are some ways that I've used spirals. Want the idea of a leafy embellishment, but in a more decorative way? Spirals, baby! Wide, fat, flattened spirals will give a great stylized feeling of cloudy skies. Texture sheets can impress spirals into your clay. Go ahead, try it. If you have any kind of a texture sheet and it's got spirals in it, you can use that. It's really fun. I love adding polymer clay squares, these are covered in gold leaf, to wall pieces like this one. And of course, if they also spiral, even better. Oh yeah, hair can spiral. Cool, right? This is one of my favorites. Spirals everywhere. You want to know how to add wire support and polymer to a rock base like this? I show you how in this book, no extra charge. Page 11, from seeing to making a hands-on look at creativity. Can you make too many spirals in one piece of artwork? Nope, you cannot. Obviously, you can use lots of other things to add spiral motifs to your creations. Wire does a trick in this piece, and I'm talking about the steampunk horse here. I've got a whole bunch of pictures here we're talking about. Just curl it, the wire, by hand or with pliers and insert it into the clay before baking. You can put wire and all kinds of fun things in polymer clay and bake them right in. It's one of the joys of working with that material. As a variation, you can create a long snake of clay from a gradient of colored clay and then flatten it and coil it up on itself. Don't fall down into this rabbit hole. Can you see how I've coiled it so that a little bit of the layer behind is viewable as we go around and around and around? Doesn't that create an interesting feeling of depth because of the colors of that spiral? Okay, so this is a fun technique. Roll out a sheet of clay, polymer clay, rub on a thin coating of acrylic paint, and while the paint, is still wet, use a tool to scribble spirals in the surface. I use like a ball tip tool, an embossing tool, those are great. Let it dry, and then you can use the clay to cover a shape like a pendant or as the background for a wall piece. Pretty nifty, huh? Most ferns start out as tight spirals, so that makes it pretty easy to create a simple fern-like design. Use striped clay, but don't twist it, and you'll get an interesting effect like I did here. Fun foodie fact. If this pickled cucumber had been just a little longer, it would have been a much more impressive spiral. Tasty though. When you go to Japan, try to eat as many Japanese pickles as you can. They pickle so many different vegetables and they are so fabulous. Just a suggestion. Okay, page 12 and 13. Page 12, triple spirals. Let's create. I saw this building decoration in Prague, and there you can see this beautiful metal piece that was on a door or a wrought iron fence or something. The spirals really caught my eye. And there they are down at the bottom. See how cool they are interlocking like that? This is something that I really like to do, and maybe it will be helpful for you too. When I see something interesting, I take a picture of it, if I can, or I sketch it in my ever-present notebook for reference, and then I think about how I can use the inspiration to make something different. Here's one of the ideas that I came up with after looking at the picture of that spiral decoration. Again, a triple spiral pendant. Maybe you'll want to make one with me, or be inspired by the idea and then take it somewhere else that only you could imagine. Number one, roll out a snake of clay and then flatten it a bit with the roller. Roll that into a spiral, and you know how to do that already. Repeat to make 2 more spirals. Number 3, lay one spiral flat on a tile. I work on glazed ceramic tile a lot. It's really easy to work on that and then put that straight in the oven to cure the polymer clay. Make sure all the curves are fluid, no bent angles. 4, press the second spiral next to the first and manipulate it so it will curl under and then over or whatever other kind of a swoop you find attractive. Just make it look interesting, and then add the third spiral in the same way. 5, adjust everything so that all the curves are rounded. Press the tops together and then pierce for a stringing hole. So now, if you want to, you can use powders to add shine and shadows. But if you want to follow me into another rabbit hole of creativity, we can turn this piece into brass. Either add the powders and then bake it, or leave it as it is and bake it. Either way, it's time to bake. Now, it would also be a good time for a little chocolate break. That's also a good time for us to take a chocolate break, too. Feel free to go get some chocolate. I'll wait. Number 8, we will turn this piece brass by applying Swelligent brass metal coating to it. Just by the way, Swelligent at the time that I wrote this book was one of my product lines. It's a metal coating that you can paint onto anything. There are several of those out there on the market. Any one of them that will give you a brass finish will work just fine. I love Swelligent, so hopefully you'll find the Swelligent and use that because it's great. I add age by using darkening patina. Also, just a sidebar, at the time that I'm reading this, it may be that you end up using a black dye of the Swelligent line or universal black. There's a couple different products that's in transition at the time that I'm explaining this to you, but there'll be a way to make it look dark. So add some age by using darkening patina. If you haven't used Swelligent products before, go to the back of the book for more information. Tip: Add gold mica powder to that brass metal coating when you're doing the final rub step. And again, I have a YouTube video on using Swelligant. By the time you're watching this, I may have more than one, who even knows? But there's lots of information out there about using Swelligant and that little trick of rubbing it on to add another little bright coat right at the end there. Remember to protect it with a sealant, also in that product line, before you can use a chain or a ribbon, and wear it proudly. So let's see, we got a little bit of thing on the edge here, and this one says, keep an eye out for spirals as you stroll through the world, and then think about how you can use those wonderful designs to inspire something you make. And there's some really wonderful spirals there that I found out in nature. Like a hibiscus flower starting to unfurl, a wonderful coiled spiraling seed pod, those beautiful spirals from a tree fern about ready to just burst into a giant leaf, and then just some shells making their own little spiral in an ocean setting. Page 14 and 15, I see wood. Wood is lovely, right? The color, texture, shape. There's no mystery as to why we would want to use wood in our artwork. But why mimic the look of wood with polymer clay instead of using real wood? Well, of course, you can use real wood in your creations, but there are some advantages to faking it. A little picture here. A piece of real driftwood is the perfect base for this mixed media mosaic piece. I live in Maui, so I have access to driftwood, which is wonderful. Anybody who lives along the coast or near a river can often find driftwood. Keep your eye out for beautiful pieces for your own inspiration, but to include in your art or as a base or even as a way of displaying things. I have wood like all over my display area. Some of it's driftwood, some of it's other, but I always keep my eye open for pretty pieces of wood. All right, so now we're going to talk about faking wood using polymer clay. There are some advantages to faking it, like size. You can create small pieces easily. It would be harder to do that with real wood. And you can use head pins to mimic nails so the size proportions can look realistic. Color, texture. You can mimic the look of exotic woods easily with polymer. You can add little knots and grains. You can make little pieces of driftwood or small branches. You can make the wood look old or shiny new. You can paint on it too. You don't have to search for just the perfect piece of wood. You can make the perfect piece of wood. Convenience. It's fast to work with polymer. You can make the pieces you want in the sizes you want and then cut, carve, and assemble them without needing big power tools. Convinced? Yeah, I thought so. Let's zip through the basics of making faux wood from polymer clay. And you've been seeing some of the things that I've made out of faux polymer clay wood. Number one, start with wood colored clay. You want oak, use lighter browns, ecru, gold. You want walnut, add dark browns to the mix. You want driftwood or old weathered wood, go heavy on the white and the gray, a little bit of black with your browns. Number two, roll out all the clay bits. Use a roller or a pasta machine to make sheets of color. Stack them all up and roll them flat again. I suggest that you use a roller this time so it won't get too thin too fast. Now, rip the layered sheet up, stack all of those pieces on top of each other again, and roll it flat. This is how we're getting thinner little striations of color, which will make the wood grain. Repeat the process until a cut through the stack with your cutting blade shows very thin but noticeable layers. If you want, you can bend the layers or fold them to add waves like real wood grain. To make faux wooden boards or panels, use your blade to cut a slice off the stack and roll it with your roller just a little to smooth it. Too much rolling will stretch the lines of the grain wider, which won't look realistic. So the trick is to cut the slice just about the width that you'd like your board or panel to be anyway. Page 16. What kind of creature is in that box, I wonder? Next, use them, the wood pieces that you've made. Cut and assemble the boards as you'd like. Trim head pins short with wire cutters and insert into the clay for nails. Yep, they can bake right into the clay. Number 6, you want a branch or a vine or a piece of driftwood? First, pick out the right color for the look you want, and then once you've gone through the steps in making your layered stack, slice off a thicker chunk and cut it into the right size for the branch, and pinch it with your fingers here and there to make it look more knobby and irregular, like a branch would look. And the reason we do it that way is when you cut it, you're revealing those thin little layers, which is the wood grain. Add texture to the surface with a toothbrush, a wire brush, or texture tool. Now what? You got wood. What you gonna do with it? Oh, I don't know. Maybe just wrap it around some clay. And then there's a little sketch there. A faux wood box with hiding creature inside. What kind of creature? Page 17, Heavy Bottoms Rock. Creative suggestion. Let the material speak to you. I came across this dude in Tokyo. If you look closely, you can see that there was once a metal trunk. See the shape like a shield the metal trunk would have connected there. Somewhere in the history of this elephant, that metal piece was lost. Some very clever creative person solved the problem with a trunk-like piece of wood. The same was done for the tusks that were also missing. In my opinion, this is the essence of art. Look around you. Ideas are everywhere. Listen to the whispering of your own creativity. Act on your imaginative impulses. This awesome elephant is the result of someone who looked, listened, and acted, and the world is just a little bit more special because of it. Don't you think? Creative nudge. See, right down here at the bottom, creative nudge. Heavy bottoms. You need a heavy bottom so it won't fall over. At least you do if you're a sculptor. One way is to use epoxy clay to secure a piece of thick wire to a rock. Remember I told you I was going to tell you about that at no extra charge? Well, here that is right now. Then you can cover that little rock with polymer clay or not. Just build your sculpture right over the wire for strength. See the back of the book for more details on using epoxy clay and wire for armatures and support. I use that little trick all the time. I get an interesting looking rock and use just a little mixed blob of epoxy clay to stick wire or wires into that rock. And then when it hardens, I can create sculptures using that as like an armature skeleton for the sculptures. It works super terrific. I hope you'll try it sometime. Page 18. Let's be small-minded, but in a good way. So here's a bunch of pictures here. Expect the unexpected. I don't know why, but I keep bumping into little houses during my travel. International hobbits, maybe? And here's some pictures of a little teeny house in West Virginia. And look, you can see how tiny the house is because see how big I am and I'm all squatted down like that? That's how you can tell. Kyoto, Japan. Lake Pollock, Serbia. Okay, so for a house, it's not little, but it's a castle. So it's tiny. And then another little one in the Prague, the Czech Republic. Coming across little houses during my travels seems to be a thing. So when that keeps happening, I pay attention and maybe feel inspired to make little houses and tiny castles when I'm back at home in my studio. Lots of folks love tiny dwellings, fairy houses, miniature worlds. Maybe you should make one sometime. They're really fun. Page 19. Color, 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 color. It's so important to the success of your art. Color. I am always on the lookout for pops of color to inspire me. Snap a picture when you come across a creatively suggestive hue, okay? Christmas illumination display, Tokyo. 40 Shades of Pink, Denver, Colorado. Definitely suggestive, Oahu, Hawaii. Pink Pow, Brisbane, Australia. Grape Expectations, Bordeaux, France. Farmers Market, Prague, Czech Republic. Resplendent Rooftops, Lake Maggiore, Italy. Frozen Treat, Tracy Arm Ford, Alaska. Poetic Tori, Miyajima, Japan. Poppy Power, Tehachapi, California. Toothpaste Runoff, Lake Louise, Banff, Canada. Caribbean Blue, Nassau, Bahamas. Muka Masterpiece, Stained Glass, Prague, Czech Republic. Page 20 and 21, let's create. Let's play with color. You can easily add a pop of color to anything you create in so many ways. Using the natural colorfulness of polymer clay, adding powders, paints or dyes to any material you're using, and of course, incorporating accents of beads and crystals to your creation. So let's look at incorporating color by adding crystals. For this, let's use epoxy clay. It's easy and really wonderful for this kind of assemblage work. And there you can see a few things that I've added. Just little pops of color to using epoxy clay for the fish and for the little flora brooch. And then I've used mostly resin for the little seahorse pendant. We're going to talk about epoxy clay. This project uses epoxy clay. Not familiar with this awesome material? Wander to the back of the book and read through the overview. I'll wait for you. You can wait till the end if you want. It's okay. Number 1, mix 2 parts of the epoxy clay together thoroughly, which I discuss. Wear gloves. Number 2, press the clay into the bezel to fill it. Keep a little epoxy clay set aside for adding bits. 3, gather up your findings, metal, bead, cabs, drops, filigree, perhaps some crystals too. By the way, I really should have put gathering up your findings before you mix up the clay. It's a good idea to gather up the things you're going to create with before you mix the epoxy clay, because you have about an hour of good sticky work time with epoxy clay, so you don't want to waste it wandering around your studio looking for things. Do that first, then mix the clay. Okay, start shoving them, all those things you've gathered up, just push them right into the epoxy clay. Look how awesomely they stand up just where you stick them. I love epoxy clay. Number 4, you want to add a bead or a long crystal inside a bead cup. Just put a little ball of epoxy clay on the end and then shove it in. 5, how about adding a little crystal to the tip of beads? You can do that. In fact, add more balls of epoxy clay anywhere more bling needs to be. And don't forget the big bling. A really eye-catching color pop in the center is a good thing. Just press it in firmly. Finally, fill in any gaps by just pressing crystals or beads anywhere you think they're needed. 8, let it dry. Most epoxy clays take about 24 hours to fully cure to rock hard. Wow, colorfully wonderful, huh? Page 22. Just ask Dr. Wellington Squidberry. By the way, Wellington is my grandson. He is older than the picture that is in this book, but Squidberry is a little nickname that we have for him, and he is my creative companion. The importance of being chalkinated. Chocolate is not just an indulgence, it's an artistic necessity. It has been scientifically proven that chocolate totally increases your imagination and creativity by over 380%. Just ask Dr. Wellington Squidberry. I concur. Not a real doctor, not a real statistic, but it should be. Just a word about the power of powders. Powders are a wonderful thing. They have the power to transform polymer clay and indeed almost all other media as well. I use chalk powders, mica powders, pigment powders, pastels, even micro glitter to add shading, color graduation, sparkle, and shine. Use a brush to apply, and sometimes your fingers. The powder will adhere to the clay and bake right on, and in the case of epoxy clay, it will just dry right to the surface. For jewelry pieces, you'll probably want to add clear protective coating after baking to protect the powders from wear. Now, this isn't in the book, but a little commentary. Powders can also enhance a lot of other materials. If you work with encaustic, try using some powders. If you are painting, you can add powders to your paint to bring on a completely different look, including mica powders to add shimmer and shine. If you use resins, powder can go in the resins as well. So just use powders, okay? Page 23, Roly-Poly Rumble-Tumble. Tales of Travel Adventure. Travel is an interesting thing. I see so many things when I travel that inspire my creativity. Sometimes my brain is distracted with imagining stuff, and I should be paying more attention to my surroundings. Here's an example. I was traveling with some family and friends. We were in Dorset, England, on a sightseeing jaunt, and of course, there was a hill with a castle on top. Got to go up there and see that, right? Right. I am always up for adventure. But here's the thing. Getting up is easy. Getting down, well, gravity gets involved and it's a bit more tricky. So here's a couple of pictures. A lovely day to look out over the countryside from the ruins of an ancient Norman castle high atop a hill. Steep steps back down the hill. Is there an ancient Norman castle handrail, perhaps? Reenactment. Nope, no handrail. Of course, I slipped on the steps. Somehow I had the presence of mind, or somebody was watching out for me, to fling myself to the side and go cartwheeling down the grass instead of smashing my gob on ancient Norman stone steps. Shoes and glasses and camera went flying. I wish I could say that I shouted out something like, "As you wish," because that would have been awesome, but I think there was just a lot of cursing. Nothing got broken, lost, bruised, or damaged except my ego, and I have more than enough of that to spare. Thank goodness for the misty, moisty England and its soft and soggy with recent rains grassy hills. Moral of the story, go for it. Chances are you'll be fine. I see fossils. I see fossils because I look for them everywhere. It all started when I was about 7 years old. My family took a trip to the beach, and wonder of wonders, the sands were sprinkled with tiny black triangles, prehistoric shark's teeth. I gathered them up in my little kid hands, and it was the beginning of my love of fossils. I like to use real fossils in my own art whenever I can. Luckily, they're pretty easy to come by. You can find them in many fossil-rich locations just by hunting around. And of course, you can buy them online and in person at mineral shows. And those touristy places that have lots of tumbled rocks and crack-em-open geodes for sale. If you don't already have a fossil pile, now would be a good time to begin. Moab, Utah. Can't you just feel the dinosaur bones hiding in these rock formations? Hawaii, home to T-Rex and his Jurassic Park pals. Here are a few things that I've snuck fossils into. Just see how easy it is. I use ammonites a lot because they're not only beautiful, but also pretty cheap and plentiful. This piece uses epoxy clay to assemble all the bits in a mosaic-y style. I got a bucket of crinoid fossils, a prehistoric animal related to starfish, at a little mineral show once. It's like a little treasure hoard that I dip into occasionally. These crinoid pieces are wrapped with wire to embed them into polymer clay background of this piece. Amber is fossilized plant resin. I just love the golden glow. You have to be careful about baking amber into polymer clay because it usually darkens. And it can even burn. So test a little piece first if you have enough to see if you can add it to the clay before baking, or you'll need to attach it afterwards. Here I used ammonite fossils to make an ammonite creature. Pretty appropriate, right? Page 26. Of course, back then, dumb bonnets were popular. The Jurassic Coast. A perfect day for fossil picking in Swanage, Dorset, on the Jurassic Coast. Here are a few of the fossils I found that day. Good times. This book is about seeing. Traveling helps you see new things. The new things open up new ideas and new possibilities. I already knew a little about the Jurassic Coast in Dorset, England, when I traveled there, but I was curious to know more. I wanted to see a little more clearly what was behind those patterned pebbles that I found on this unpretentious little curve of beach. And here's what I found out. The Jurassic Coast is about 100 miles, now a World Heritage Site, along the English Channel coast. The layers of rock formations exposed here cover 185 million years of geological history. The Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods, in case you were wondering. In the early 1800s, a gal named Mary Anning started finding fossils here and became a collector, dealer, and paleontologist at the time when dinosaur rage was just beginning, and her findings and observations played a key role in the new science. And there's a little picture of her. It's a portrait of Mary Anning and her dog Trey, attributed to Mr. Gray, circa 1840. And I did it all in a big dumb bonnet, is not what she said. Fun fact, it's claimed that she is the inspiration behind the tongue twister, she sells seashells at the seashore. Of course, being a woman, she was not allowed to join the all-male Geological Society of London, and she struggled financially all her life. In 2010, the Royal Society finally included Mary Anning in the list of the 10 British women who have most influenced the history of science. And now you know. Page 27, Fee Fi Fo Fossil. Let's create. You can use real fossils in your artwork, obviously, but how about making fossils? That sounds like fun, doesn't it? Let's play around with that idea and see where it takes us. First, there is the obvious. You can make a mold of any fossil with prominent details and use that to recreate faux fossils using polymer clay or epoxy clay in the mold, obviously. Here's a real piece of fossilized coral, the mold I made of it, and the polymer fake. Hard to tell the difference, huh? Fossils are old, that's their magic, but they don't have to be boring. Press your clay into your fossil mold. Cut the clay impression into a pendant shape. Add crystals. I use flat-back glass rhinestones with a hot fix backing. That's a heat-activated glue so that it attaches itself in the oven to the polymer clay. Make a hanger using wire and some crystals too. Push it back into the pendant and bake. And obviously you could do the same thing with epoxy clay or resin. Just a word about mold making. You can make your own reusable molds. It's so easy. Zip to the back of the book to see how. And we'll get there eventually, but you can zip back there anytime you like. Page 28. How many faux fossil ferns do you want? A lot. So while we're playing with molds, let's make a mold of a fake fern fossil, because you don't always have all the real fossils you want, but why should that slow us down? To make the base for a faux fossil, it's important to have something that looks like rock, so it will be more believable. But using a real rock means that we can't press the fern piece into it. So the mold material will often get between the rock and the fern, ruining the mold. So let's try this little trick. Psst, you're going to need a real fern leaf. And I have a picture there of a real fern fossil and a fake fern fossil. Number one, take a new block of polymer clay and use a blade to cut all around the block about 1/4 to 1/2 inch deep. Number two, pull the clay apart. It should split on that line that you just cut in there to reveal a distinctly rock-like surface. Pick your favorite side and lay the fern leaf on the surface. Press it down into the clay as much as possible without leaving fingerprints. That's an obvious sign of a fake fossil. 4. Now mix up your silicone mold making material. Just read the directions and follow accordingly. And press it down onto both the fern and the clay background and then let it cure. Usually that's pretty quick. Most silicone mold material take between 5 and 20 minutes to cure. Release the mold by pulling it off the clay and take off that little fern bit. And then now prepare some fossil colored clay. Press it into the mold. 6. Pull out the clay. Ta-da! Instant fossil. But wait, there's more! Use powders to add the look of authentic mineralization and aging. I used a kind of caramel brown on the fern impression and a sort of chocolate darker brown around the edges to bring out the detail. Then I covered the whole thing with white and pale tan powders. Brush off all the excess and then use clear tape to remove the powders in order to minimize that fake look and let the details pop. It's sort of like antiquing, only you're doing it with powder. The more you play with powders and the tape to remove them, the better you'll get at this trick of coloring with clay. And basically the trick, I'll just tell you, use a lot of new fresh tape, just like a Scotch tape or, just a clear tape, and lay it on top, press it gently, pull it, and you'll keep pulling off more and more powders, and then just stop when it looks good. And then I have some pictures there on the fern fossil variation. Number 1, mix a rock-colored clay and roll it into a sheet. Then press a fern frond firmly into the clay. Peel the fern off. Okay. Put powder into the fern impression. Blow off the excess. Use that tape to remove it from the surface, leaving the color just in the fern impression. And then you can cut it into shape for pendants or earrings or brooch or whatever. Bake it. And then add whatever findings and the suggestions are in the back of the book. That's the way to make the look of the impression part of a fossil. Sometimes fossils are impressed and sometimes they're raised. Just depends on many factors. But there's 2 thoughts for you. Okay, page 30. Faking an ammonite. It's all about the powder. Real ammonites are easy to get, but fake ones are easy to make. You want to make one with me? Number 1, mix an ammonite colored clay. What color is that? Just some sort of dirty color, like browns and grays and that kind of thing. Number 2, use a needle tool to press grooves all along that snake of clay. I suggest that you place the needle tool flat onto the clay and then gently roll the clay so the tool impresses just the line into almost the entire circumference. Just pressing lines on the top is not going to look very realistic. 3, powder time. Brush it on, tape it off, you know how. Number 4, roll it up like a cinnamon bun. Number 5, add some more powder, maybe a darker color this time, to the inside that will add depth. Tape it off of all the surfaces that look like they need it to come off. Number 6, use the blade of a tool to add more details. I like adding smaller lines all over. Page 31. Can you tell I like fossils? Fossil corals. One of my favorite fossils is fossilized coral. They come in so many variations and look great in their rough, raw, natural form or highly polished. I think we should play around with faux fossilized coral, not only because it's cool, but also because this uses a caning technique, and that's something we haven't explored together yet. A cane is an ancient technique used in glass making. Making canes with polymer clay is amazing. You can make large, complex canes or small, simple, use-em-up canes like the one we're going to do right now. Number 1, start with a little log of clay. Number 2, pinch it all along one side to make a log that looks like somebody stepped on. Number 3, make a thin sheet from a contrasting color of clay, wrap it around that pinched log. Number 4, press the clays together, running your fingers over the log from the middle to the ends, stretching ever so gently. This will make sure the two clays are connected and will elongate the cane as well. This is generally called reducing. Cut that log in half and stack the two halves on top over next to each other. Press them gently to connect. Page 32. You could use this cane for lots of other things too. Number 6, do that elongating trick with your fingers again, reducing. This time squeeze a little bit more forcefully so the cane gets thinner as well as longer, but keep a light touch. Squashing does not help. 7, cut it in half and stack together, stretch. Keep doing that until you have a half circle. Now cut that in half and make a full circle by pressing the two halves, the two pieces together. Stretch that again. You can use this cane just as it is, but I like to add one more layer of detailing to make it look a little bit more authentic. 9, use a bit of each color or something similar and make thick sheets. Stack them. Number 10, cut and stack them again. Flatten the stack with your fingers. Irregular lines are nicer, so fingers work better than rollers. Repeat cutting, stacking, and flattening until you have a layered chunk. Number 11, cut the sections of the layered stack and add them to the outside of your cane so that the lines radiate out like rays of the sun. 12, once the outside is covered, reduce the whole thing, pulling and stretching, until you have a cane about as thick around as your pinky finger. Fantastic. Now we're ready to make a fossil coral. 13, make a partially flattened oval like a hamburger bun, sorta. Page 33, from seeing to making, a hands-on look at creativity. So step 14, cut the slices of your cane and press them all over the surface of the clay, touching but not overlapping. 15, smooth the surface without smearing. So yes to rolling with a tool, no to swiping with a finger. You can keep it really smooth if you want, and even add a very shiny glaze after baking, or sand and polish it if you're into that sort of thing, if you want to make the look of a polished gemstone style fossil. I went with a more rough, natural look by pressing the surface with some rough sandpaper. 17, finally add a little powder and remove the excess with tape to make it look awesome. Variation. This is a fun variation for an even more natural look. For this, I saved a piece of the cane before I added the roll of stripes around the outside. Cut the slices and lay them all over an oval of clay, just like before. Smooth the surface also, but not as much. You can leave gaps between the slices. Then use a big ball-tipped tool, anything with a big round tip, to press an indentation into the center of each cane. And with another tool, I'm using my Wow It's Awesome tool, which you can find on my website. Use the tool to drag the lines all around the inner core of each cane slice. Add powders here and there to make it look aged. That looks cool, right? Idea, use your faux fossil coral to make a heart. Not just an oval, but a heart shape. Sedimentary rocks. Get it? Fun foodie fact. The best drink to quench your thirst and relax your mind after a long day in the fossil fields is an icy cold trilobite martini on the rocks, preferably sedimentary. So now what? You've made fake fossils. What can you do with them? Well, we talked about pendants, and of course, brooches, earrings, and other jewelry adornments are always great. If you work with metal, polymer fossils can be inserted into a bezel setting. Like wire wrapping, wrap up a fossil. Here's another idea. Cover a metal tin with a layer of polymer and then add an assemblage of faux fossils to make an awesome box. Have you tried silk screening on polymer clay? Just use a stiff plastic card to squeegee acrylic paint through the screen and add onto the top of the clay. Let it dry and then add color if you want. Wrap the design around a form. It's an interesting way to create. Give it a try. And there I have a little screen print pattern that I made once upon a time and adding some colors there. And you can use acrylic, you can use powder mixed with water. Those all work good. Page 35. We did end up keeping her. Man, she eats a lot. Cuckoo's Curiosities. My name to my grandson is Cuckoo. It's a big, long story, but that's what he calls me, so hence the name, Cuckoo's Curiosities. Do you have a child in your life, grandchild, niece, nephew, adorable neighbor child? If so, maybe you'll want to have a clay play day with the little kiddo. And here's a really fun project that you can do together. And here's the picture. Can I keep her? I promise I'll take care of her. Number 1, make dinosaur bones out of polymer clay. Keep the shapes simple. T-Rex is a good one to start with because every child loves T-Rex for some reason. So you can make a hole, insert the liquid clay, insert the tooth, use powders, texture with a toothbrush, that kind of thing. Bake the clay bones, let them cool. Get a pan and add some sand. You can get it at the hardware store usually. Add the bones, completely cover them with sand, and let your junior paleontologist, artist, excavate and reassemble the fossils. Hint, you may want to draw or print out a picture of how the bones are supposed to go together. And as I mentioned, so who's Cuckoo? I am. That's what my adorable grandson, who is pictured here, calls me. So now we get out of fossils and into something else. I see leaves. Page 36, you should get Flourish, which is my other book, or one of my other books. I really love to make leaves. I have a whole other book that is full of leaves and plant designs. I think I've managed to sneak leaf projects into just about every book I've written. But what the heck, I see leaves, so I make leaves. Sculptural polymer clay leaves are always fun. And there's a bunch of different little leafy pictures there. And just a little mention about that book, Flourish. That's all kinds of leaf and other flora type designs, flowers and that sort of thing. And it is available as an ebook that you can get on my website. But let's do something different. This is a more two-dimensional, graphic-y way to add leaf imagery to a large bead. Or you could use the same technique to decorate a vessel or a bowl or a wall piece, or even make big cutouts and add them directly to your wall as a kind of sculptural stencil. Wouldn't that be cool? Let me show you this technique on a big bead form. Roll some clay into an oval and then skewer it. I used a big metal knitting needle, the kind that are pointy on both ends. This makes a great way to hold it while you're working, and you can bake it right on that needle too. Twist the bead to break the grab after baking, and then you can ease the needle out. To make the leaf cutouts, choose your favorite color of clay and then roll it onto a sheet. Pasta machines do great with that, or you can use a hand roller. Lay it on a tile because cutting the clay when it is grabbing a tile is much easier. Use a craft knife and cut out a simple leaf shape. Make it big, not so big that it won't fit on your bead, of course, but remember, you can go diagonally. Page 37. This is really a fun technique, by the way. Add lines using a needle tool as flat as you can to press the lines into the clay, not scratch them in. With your knife, cut out little windows. Those pressed lines will stay on the clay as a kind of decoration with the cutouts in between. Pick out all the cutouts with a tool, like the tip of your craft knife. Cleanup is kind of tedious. Use a tool to press the clay inside the lines and smooth out those little cut edges the best you can. Use a blade to lift the delicate piece off the tile, and that's a cutting blade. It's a long, flat, uh, a cutting blade. It's like a long, flat razor blade, and you can use that to lift your clay right off of the tile and transport it to your bead. Gently lift it off the blade, transfer it to the bead, adjust any wobbly lines, and then press gently all over to connect it. Make a different kind of leaf by cutting out lots of small little leafy shapes and then placing them on either side of a thin slice of clay. Add as many more leafy shapes as you need to fill out the surface of the bead. Use your needle tool to press lines into the clay to give each leaf some detail. Add powders to the leaves, to the surface of the beads, whatever and wherever you like. And then bake, of course. That's a good trick, don't you think? I like it. Page 38. From seeing to making, a hands-on look at creativity. That's my sort of default phrase at the top if we didn't put something else more fun in there. Okay, fun so far, right? Let's look at a few more techniques. The thing about techniques is that you can adapt them to fit so many other ideas, not just these leafy suggestions. So as you look at the steps that demonstrate these techniques, think about what else you might want to make. Let's use this technique as inspiration for our own polymer version. I picked up this small ginkgo leaf chopstick holder in Kamakura, Japan. Although it's made especially for us tourists, it is a nice example of Kamakura buri, a traditional art form where designs are carved from wood, lacquered, and then polished to reveal subtle layers of coloring. So let's use that technique. Number one, mix your clay to get that iconic red lacquer look. I used Primo Cad Red and Bronze, 3 parts red to 1 part bronze. Whatever polymer clay you have is going to be great. I love Primo, that's my favorite, but you can use whatever. And I was just telling you there some of the colors that I use for the specific color. Create a leaf shape, make a teardrop, pinch out a stem, flatten it with your hands, curve it. Use a tool to press lines down the middle, continuing the stem. So I'm not making a ginkgo leaf here, I'm just making a regular leaf. Use a tool to press lines down the middle, continuing the stem, and use your fingers to soften those lines. Add impressions for veins on each side of the center line. Use a needle tool to add finer lines. Completely cover the surface with dark brown powder, pastel, chalk, pigment powders all work great. Bake. Cool. Number 8, use fine sandpaper, use the wet dry kind, to remove some of the brown and reveal the red underneath. Gently wipe off the excess dust with a soft cloth. Protect the colors with a layer of satin glaze. Apply with a soft cloth for the best results. And I'll talk about that at the end, but with polymer, you always, and with any material, you always want to make sure that your last coating, your clear protective coating, is compatible with your material. Here's just a little tip. You can use a texture sheet to make a fun leafy creation. Here's an idea how to keep it unique. Form a pendant shape, press in the stamp design. Brush powder into the lines and remove from the surface with tape. Curve the shape a little. Use a tool to add scratch lines or cut away the side to reveal layers, both, either one. Okay. I'm having trouble with my words. Here's a little suggestion. You can use a texture sheet to make a leafy. Here's a little suggestion. You can use a texture sheet to make a fun leafy creation. Here's an idea on how to keep it unique. Form a pendant shape. Press in the stamp design. Brush powder into the lines and remove from the surface with tape. Curve the shape a little. Use a tool to add scratch lines or cut away the side to reveal layers, or both. Add an interesting hanger. Page 39. A papaya would be tasty right now. Have you heard of bas-relief? It's a technique in which the shapes are carved so that they are only a little higher than the background. It's a particularly great technique for polymer clay because we can easily build up the shapes, but they will still look carved. Sneaky, huh? Let's try it out. And let's use that papaya leaf as our model. Now, I'm noticing here that there's a wrong picture in this book. You see that I'm curving that little red thing? That was from the other page. So somehow, when we laid it out, there was probably supposed to be a picture of those clays. Darn it. If only there was a prize for finding a mistake. Speaking of papaya, hiya papaya, Waimanalo, Oahu. Just makes you want to get out the old sketchbook and doodle, right? So I'm in Maui now, and we have papaya trees everywhere, but it is a particularly beautiful tree with a very lovely leaf. All right, let's get back to how to make it. Number one, mix your clays. I suggest using a bit of gray granite, which is a primo color. It's a translucent color that has little flecks in it. It's very specific to that brand. Or mixing a little black embossing powder into your clay for a stone-like look if you don't have the granite. Make a shape. I made an oval and flattened it. Use a needle tool to press a curved line down the center, sort of at an angle. So it's not completely down the center. It's kind of curved off to the side. To make the parts of this leaf, start by rolling out a small bit of clay, shaping it into an oval, roll and pinch the ends into points, and then flatten. Press this onto the top of the curved line. Let's rock this thing. This leaf has 4 more of the same shape, so 5 leaves altogether, in pairs, with each pair smaller. Add them under the first leaf so that all the points touch in the center. 7. Use a tool to blend the edges of all the leaves into the surface of the clay. It doesn't have to be perfectly smooth, but it should look like everything is part of the whole, not added on. 8. Add thin vein lines to the centers of each leafy section. Number 9. Use a tool to press in more indentations to make the leafy parts more complex. This is like little serrated edges along the leaves. Number 10. Roll out a thin snake for a stem and press it onto the center of the leaf and beyond, covering that original curved line. Blend it in on all the sides. 11. Use a tool to add additional vein lines within each leaf section. 12. Let's make a different pattern for the background for contrast. How about like dimples? It's also common in a carved bas-relief sculpture piece. We can use a ball-tipped tool for this. That would have been like carved lines, as they're carving away that background. 41. It was on purpose and it was yummy, actually. We'll see what that means. 13. Brush on powders, especially into all the details. I used the white to make areas of lighter color and then added dark brown to the center of the leaf for depth. 14. Now wipe it all off with a wet wipe instead of using tape. This will make a smoother blend of colors and is especially good at getting into areas of delicate detailing without messing up tiny lines. If you have stubborn areas that need more powder removal than just the wipe can provide, you can use a brush to add a little rubbing alcohol and then resume wiping. You could also put a little bit more rubbing alcohol on the wipe. 16. Look it all over. What does it need? A little more powder, a little less, maybe a touch of green powder? Yeah, that's it. Repeat any of the steps to tweak the result to your liking. Add a hole for stringing or not. Bake. I suggest a light coat of very low shine glaze to protect the colors if you wear this piece. Maybe try it again with another leaf shape. Fun foodie fact. Is the leaf in this custard on purpose, or did it fall there? Either way, it was yummy. That's what we said at the beginning. It was on purpose and it was yummy. So just a little hint. I am acting as though you have some familiarity with polymer clay specifically and epoxy clay to some extent. If you're new at that, don't forget, you can go to my YouTube, and it'll be in the description, or Christy Universe. You can find it that way. And you can see lots of stuff about using powders, using polymer clays, using epoxy clays, and other things. Okay, so now we're here on this page, and this is Embrace Imperfection. A lot of good pictures to look at while I'm telling you the words. In our desire to make pretty things, we sometimes forget that the imperfect, damaged, and worn can be beautiful too. To make your creations more complex and evolved, I suggest embracing imperfection. This is not the same as being sloppy, messy, unfinished, or random. Imperfection as a chosen form of design enhancement takes a keen eye. The best way to get a keen eye is to use those little blue eye drops twice a day. Just kidding. The best way is to observe. Look at old things, broken things, things that have been nibbled, eroded, things with holes, patches, repair. As you notice which are pleasing and which are not, you'll start to train yourself in how to replicate the patterns in your own creations. Break something. Go ahead, break it. I know that sounds scary, but think about it. What does a piece say when it's broken? There is a different message, a different emotional content. Might be something worth exploring, so snap polymer, rip paper, smash pottery, rough it up, sand it, smooth, make it rusty. Let the imperfection become the piece. Just a little side note about this piece I'm showing you here. I created that piece during a demonstration that I was doing for one of my workshops, and I baked it, but I didn't bake it as long as I normally would do if I was at home in my home studio. So when I got home and unpacked it, it had a piece that was broken. So I was going to repair it, and then I thought, wait a minute, how would this look if I broke it further? And then I went on to make a finished piece by putting all those broken pieces in the assembly with other things around it. And I think it turned out really good. Page 44 and 45. Finishing touches. Getting the hang of it. Sometimes your stuff needs a way to hang. Pendants need loops, wall pieces need hangers in the back, that sort of thing. Hangers for pendants are easy. Use wire that is thick enough to be sturdy. Usually, I use 20 gauge wire. Bend a piece into an arch. Wire usually bends perfectly by just holding one end with pliers and using your fingers to bend it. I always add a bend at one end to help anchor the wire into polymer clay, and you can see the kind of bend I'm talking about where I just sort of fold it over on itself into a little U. You don't need that bend if you're adding the hanger to epoxy clay. You can get a little crazy by adding more loops to the hanger. I love that look and I do it all the time. Oh, and all you have to do is just shove that loop right into the clay. Hangers can be simple and tidy or loose and complicated. Add a wrapped wire for more interest. You can even slip beads into each one of the wraps. The hanger for a wall piece is just that simple arched wire with the bend on each end for extra stability. Attach it to the back of baked polymer with a little liquid clay and a covering of fresh polymer pressed over the ends of the wire and the liquid clay. Obviously, rebake it to cure. Usually another 20-25 minutes is plenty of time for this. And there's some suggestions or some inspirations on some of my other pieces there. Page 44, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Creative nudge. Keep it loose. There is a certain magic to working loosely. It looks effortless. That is the goal, anyway. But if you've tried it, you know that making something look like you just easily created perfection actually takes a lot of time and practice. The trick is to make each stroke of color or texture count. When I laid down that stripe of purple in this petal, for instance, I thought about exactly where and how I wanted it to look, and only then did I take one swipe to make it look spontaneous. This takes practice. There were lots and lots of practice swipes on other pieces of clay first before getting to this loose stage. Ditto for the scratches. It does look like I just quickly scratched all over, doesn't it? Well, actually, I did scratch all over quickly, but only because I've practiced the art of deliberately random for a while now, and I can do it loosely and easily most of the time. Go ahead, loosen up. Practice spontaneity. That's ironic, isn't it? Creativity nudge. Wrap it up. Sometimes you just need to wrap things up. This is a great little trick for framing a piece, I think. Just roll out a snake of clay and flatten it with your fingers. Well, that's what I do because I like irregular best. But you could also use a roller to make it less irregular if you're into that sort of thing. Now, just wrap around the piece. Add some decorative balls of clay in between the layers if you want. You can use a little liquid clay around the edges if you're wrapping a fresh clay around a baked piece. But isn't that a fun little, like a little frame? I like it. 46 and 47. I see tentacles. In Seattle, you'll just never know where tentacles will turn up. There's a lot of wall art graffiti stuff in Seattle. At least it was when I went. Tentacles! Why are tentacles so popular? I don't really know. Maybe because they're wiggly and weird and sinuous and ever changing and they have suckers. I mean, really, what's not to like? Since we're trying to be aware of what we see during our journey through life and to let the things we see influence our creative choices, let's think about how often we come across tentacles. Well, often enough for me, it seems, since they creep into my work all the time. Of course, now that I'm in Hawaii and I can snorkel regularly, I see tentacles a lot more often. I thought that tentacles and things with them would be a good motif for a technique that I love to work with, and I think that you will too. Sgraffito. Sgraffito refers to the trick of scratching through a colored surface layer to reveal another color underneath. It's like drawing but backwards, taking color off instead of adding it. It's great fun. Let's run through the steps. Number 1, roll out a sheet of clay about as thick as a quarter, a US coin. Cut it into shape. I decided to make a pair of asymmetrical earrings, so I cut it into 2 irregular rectangles. Number 2, use 23 or 24 karat gold leaf. Real gold is very malleable, so the scratch lines will be clean. If you use just gold colored metal leaf, the lines will get cracky. Lay the gold leaf on its carrier paper face down onto the clay, rub gently and peel the paper away. Use a paintbrush to gently push the gold down onto the clay. And I'm talking polymer clay here. Use additional gold leaf to fill in any large gaps. Now use a tool to scratch through the gold leaf, exposing the black clay underneath. I'm using my Wow It's Awesome tool, which you can get on my website, because it's got a really fun little curved edge with a nice little scratching end that works perfect for this technique. The picture there is Squidman in Tokyo. Tentacle powers activate. He was a cool dude I saw down in Tsukiji in the fish market section in Tokyo. I decided to make one long, curvy tentacle on each of the rectangle shapes. These are easy. Just make a wavy line, curl it into a curve at the end, and then make a parallel line next to it, getting narrower towards the curve. Have the lines meet up at the top. Obviously, that's how you make a tentacle, right? Next, add little circles in the middle all the way up. Ta-da! Tentacle. Use a soft, flat paintbrush to gently sweep away any of the scraps of clay from your scratching. Continue to scratch. I like lots of black showing around the tentacles. Brush on a little bit of color if you want. You go on, you can do it. 7, to add a loop for hanging earrings or pendants. We'll need this. Here's a trick. Roll out another sheet of black clay. Cut it a little bit bigger than the tentacle piece. Next, bend an angle into an eye pin to keep it anchored firmly, like a little foot at the end, right? Lay it on the background piece with the eye sticking out above the top edge. Lay the tentacle piece on top, lining up to the top edges. Press them gently to connect and then trim the other 3 edges. Obviously, repeat on the other piece if you're doing 2 earrings. Now you can bake. And then add a jump ring and to the eye pin and then ear wires or chain if it's a pendant. Ta-da! There is a little small shallow bowl because tentacles look good on anything. Big eyes make it 39% cuter. Cute little octopus baby. I love to use resin to create water. It's clear and it stays put once it cures anyway, so it's an ideal medium to use. In this project, we'll play with UV curing resin. The other kind of resin is 2-part air dry resin, which is equally awesome. There are different properties and uses for each, and I've included a little bit about resins in the back of the book. Let's go. Roll out a little ball for a head. The size of the ball depends on the size of the bezel. I use an open bezel because that way you get the full effect of the water. Set the ball inside your bezel to test the fit. Press in a couple of eyes. I used glass eyes, something that I have on my online store, at least as I'm reading this to you, I do. But you can use glass, stone, ceramic, metal beads, components, glass rhinestones, all of these materials that can be baked into the clay with no problem. Powder. Whenever I make any kind of sculptural face, I usually give the eyes a little outlining with black powder. I think most every creature would wear eye makeup if they could, don't you? Roll out little snakes of clay for tentacles. This is an octopus, so make 8 of them. Take the head out so you can arrange the tentacles all wiggly-piggly inside the frame. Press the head then on top of the tentacle pile. Add more powders for depth and color. For suckers, just use a needle tool to press a row of holes along the underside of each tentacle. It's up to you what the underside is, but just look at how each is curving and poke accordingly. Her name is Wigglina. Bake. Let it cool. Number 9, let's use a piece of wide tape to seal the opening of the bezel by pressing the tape, on the back of the bezel. Rub firmly around the bezel's frame to seal off any gaps. Isn't it amazing that the glue on tape is a perfect resist for resin? Squeeze a small amount of UV resin, just enough to cover the entire bottom and touching the sides of the bezel all around. To add colors, you can use a little bit of mica powder or glitters, and you can mix them right on into that wet resin. Don't use much. 11. Cure this layer with sunlight or a UV lamp. This should take between 5 and 10 minutes. You can tell when it's long enough when the surface is firm, not squishy. 12. Add the Octo Baby. Add more resin. Cure this layer. If you need to, add another layer of resin. You can only go as high as the walls of your frame. Most UV resin is self-doming, which means it will bulge up higher in the middle so you can fill it pretty full. If the resin does overflow, use a wet wipe to clean up as much as you can. Now, just a note, you are going to put a very thin layer of resin, the UV resin, and cure it, and then add another and cure it, and add another and then cure it. UV resin needs to be cured thin layers at a time so that it can properly harden. Cure each layer. I usually flip the piece over and cure it for another 10 minutes with the tape side up in case there are any little pockets of uncured resin hiding underneath the tentacles. Remove the tape from the cured resin. Use more tape to lift off any residue from the tape that stays on the resin. Page 50. I'm a sucker for tentacles. Tentacle gallery. So here's a bunch of pictures to look at of stuff that I've made. Let's cuddle. A pun. I used a texture sheet to make the body pattern of this cuttlefish. That is my Van Gogh texture sheet, which you can get in my online shop. Swelligant bronze metal coating with Tiffany patina and Caribbean blue dye really make this polymer piece look like it's made from metal. I used epoxy clay to attach wires to an old watch with the cover taken off, then added polymer over the wire and sculpted the tentacles. After baking, swelligant metal coatings and patinas created both the verdigris look and rust oxidations for an authentic aged look. Ancient cephalopod? Alien? You decide. Powders on a neutral colored clay add the feel of antiquity to this piece. Little tentacle dudes and dudettes. Aww. The tentacle rings can be pendants also. Page 51. It's that resin fill technique again. The little floaters are glass glitter shards. I took a slice of striped cane and smeared it with my finger, then pressed the shape, added powder and a few lines to make this loose and lovely jelly. Sometimes simple is best. So these are also different tentacle things. I took 2 sheets of thermoclear plastic film and heated them with a heat gun to fuse them together and encase the baked polymer octopus. Interesting trick, isn't it? More on thermoclear later in the book. Plants can have tentacles, right? These were created by dipping snakes of baked polymer clay into little cups of translucent liquid Sculpey, colored with alcohol inks, and then cured with a heat gun. Layer after layer is added like a hand-dipped candle, and then inserted into the clay-covered vessel and baked together. I always like how that one turned out. It's almost magical the way a well-positioned tentacle can make a piece look like it's moving. Too many rings? Nope. Make more. Roll out a snake, taper both ends, add suckers, and then wrap around paper to bake. So make like a little paper cylinder, and you can put the tentacle around that to bake. Page 52. Say yes to adventure. Tales of travel adventure. When I was a kid, I used to love to read the book, The Secret Garden, because I like to imagine myself finding a special magical place that no one else knew about. The kid in me is still very much alive, and I was thrilled to find a secret library in Prague. Here's how it happened. I was teaching in the Czech Republic at a polymer clay event, but before it started, another teacher and a friend and I went off to see the sights of the city. Prague is an amazing city, and I could tell you several tales of adventure from our stay there. But this adventure started when we were coming out of a picturesque church after having taken loads of pictures of the artful interior. Stepping outside, we saw a sign that said, "No photographs inside," and walking right towards us, looking very serious, was a monk. "Ladies," he said, in a deep and possibly ominous tone, "would you like to see the secret library?" Huh? Well, of course I said yes immediately, and I think we're all relieved that we weren't going to be scolded for our camera sins. He took out a ring of keys and unlocked a door, and we followed. Inside a dark hallway and twisting and turning down passageways and corridors. I figured this was going to either be very amazing or we were about to be murdered. Sometimes life is unpredictable that way. He opened a simple door and we walked into a room flooded with light, lined with intricately carved wooden bookcases and full of old books, boxes of books and stacks of books, a secret garden of books. In this humidity-controlled room, there were thousands of volumes being documented and restored, some of which were hundreds and hundreds of years old. Then our monk guide pulled out a great big book with a wooden cover and leather straps and dragons on the corners and opened it. This is a collection of vellums from the 14th century, handwritten and illuminated, containing hymns and chants. It is my particular specialty, he told us in his deep voice, which was not ominous after all. Would you like to hear it? Of course we said yes, and then he began to chant the songs, following the words with his finger, presumably so we could keep up, and turning the pages until he had sung an entire song in a melodious, rich baritone. Unbelievable. Eventually, we were led back out, blinking and on our way, and absolutely amazed by the experience. We still have no idea why we got to experience this. It truly is a secret library. There are no signs, no tours. It's not mentioned on the internet. There is no Wikipedia entry. We were just in the right place at the right time, and we said yes. Page 53. I'd like another piece of that cake. Mixed media use all the things. I think it's always important to get the right material to get the right effect. Don't force a material to perform if another material would do it better and easier. This piece uses a lot of different things. It's a great example of mixed media. The legs are metal, reproductions of vintage jewelry components. I attached them to a small glass vial with epoxy clay. The vine and leaves started out as a skeleton of wire, covered with thermoclear, a heat manipulatable plastic film. The color comes from mica powder brushed onto the hot plastic and set with a heat gun. The glass vial was also wrapped with heated thermoclear to achieve a look somewhat between lamp-worked glass and a plastic wrap. There's no polymer clay simply because other materials worked better. I don't think there were any other materials that could have been substituted for any part of this design without it losing something. And that is what mixed media is all about. There's more information about thermoclear in the back of the book. Fun foodie fact. In the cafes along the shores of Lake Bled in Slovenia, you can sample this delicious local delicacy, the kremna rezina. It is creamy and flaky and just the right amount of sweetness. Of course I had a piece, or maybe two. Page 54. Fill all the walls with lovely art, I say. Creative nudge, hang it on the wall. Sometimes the problem with creating something is that you don't always know what to do with it once it's done. We often feel like it has to have a practical purpose. That's why making jewelry is so popular, because it's useful. The time spent on jewelry creativity is justified. Well, get over it. Art can be just something interesting to look at. Of course, jewelry is great and useful and wonderful. It's just that that's not the only thing. So, with that in mind, may I suggest wall art? When you create something, perhaps all you need to do with it is hang it on the wall. Ready to go. I've mounted my polymer and mixed media art pieces on wooden canvases, a great way to hang them. Use acrylic paint to add some interest to the wooden canvases if you want to, but make sure they enhance the design, not compete with it. Adding gold leaf is easy too. Just use gold leaf sizing. Follow the directions on the bottle. Page 55. Body parts are funny as long as nobody got hurt. Expect the unexpected. I've come to expect the unexpected. In fact, I keep an eye open, especially for bizarre and surprising, like random body parts. Appendages where they don't belong are especially amusing to me. They've inspired me to make a series of little vessels with feet just for the absurdity of it. As usual, keep your eyes open for the unexpected and the ideas that they'll trigger. Bead shop in Leuven, Belgium. Need a hand? Medieval drinking horn, National Museum of Ireland, Dublin. If you're too drunk to stand, at least your cup still can. Unexpected legs on a vessel. I wonder where that idea came from. Fordham and Mason store, Piccadilly, London. To practice for her famous gig, the Statue of Liberty took some practice jobs. I see mosaics. This has a bunch of just different examples. One of a series of mosaics depicting the Glass House Mountains from an observation platform in Queensland, Australia. Where the rich and famous used to swim, the Roman pool at Hearst Castle near San Simeon, California. The pool's mosaic design was inspired by 5th century Italian mosaics, which were inspired by ancient Roman baths. A fragment of an ancient mosaic floor made from chunks of stone. Where am I? Where am I going? Luckily, there is a mosaic compass right here to show me the way. Psst, I was in New York City and I was going out to lunch. When on holiday on the continent, Victorian-era ladies would buy fine jewelry, souvenir micro-mosaic brooches, like this one. From Venice, obviously. I see mosaics. Mosaics thrill me, and I'll tell you why. I get to use all the things. I am a big fan of using as many types of materials in a design as it takes to make the piece sing. Sometimes it's just one thing. Simplicity is beautiful, but more often for me, it's an assembling of many things to create a harmony of shapes, colors, textures, and forms that make me happy. Mosaics are a perfect form of art to indulge the use of many different elements. It is an ancient art form, and at its most basic consists of chunks of tesserae, tiles, together with a filler, like grout, to make the surface smooth and continuous. Of course, mosaics have come a long way since ancient times, and now they are often dimensional, sculptural, a unique art form. Adding polymer clay and epoxy and even liquid clays and resins into the process is exciting. I urge you to explore it with me now and keep on exploring on your own. Page 58. Warning, mosaic making is highly addictive. Mosaic styles. I'm not going to get into all the more traditional mosaic styles, but instead, let's just look at the things you can make with polymer clay, epoxy clay, and all the things from your stash. I'm assuming, as a creative, you have a stash of creative materials. Mosaic can be an element in a sculptural design. This is more of a faux-zaic technique, fake mosaic, but anything in art really a fake? I don't think so. The mosaic-like tiles are uncured polymer pressed into the sculpture before baking. Use those polymer scraps to create a cured polymer tesserae style mosaic. The scraps can be irregular, like this mirror, but they can also be more precise shapes. Baked polymer clay sheets, veneers, fragments, chunks, they're all perfect to turn into mosaic components. In the classical sense, smalti are mosaic tiles of colored glass. These polymer smalti are made from sheets of partially cured polymer clay that are snapped into tiles to mimic the rough edges of glass. Wet on wet polymer mosaic is the easy way to mosaic, and that's just a name I came up with. It's not like an official name or anything, but you're using uncured clays, right? The silver tiles in this design are cut from a sheet of uncured polymer clay covered with fine silver leaf and then arranged right on top of the background of unbaked polymer. The border is meant to mimic Murano glass millefiori style glass cane chunks. by using the polymer caning method. We've talked about that. The rest of the design looks like it's made from many pieces, but it's actually patterned clay veneers cut into shapes and arranged on the background. Page 59. There will be a quiz at the end, so know your bits. Know your mosaic bits. Polymer clay can be combined with all kinds of bits in a mixed media sculptural mosaic style. Let's look at a few of them. Now, by the way, I just wanted to mention here, we're using epoxy clay as the material to put all these things into. Little chips and things like that won't stick into polymer clay. I go into that in very much detail on a lot of my YouTube channel videos. Here's some of the bits. Stone chips, glass rhinestone, metal head pins, polymer clay, stone slabs, glass smalting. Before grout, after grout. Grout is the thing that often goes in between the tiles of a mosaic. It has a lot of purposes in the traditional mosaic technique, but it's a totally optional thing with mixed media mosaics because grout adds color. It can significantly change the finished appearance. Just a word about bases and glue. Polymer mosaics use polymer as the base and liquid clay as the glue to attach the tiles. Liquid clay only connects polymer to polymer, however. For other materials, use epoxy clay. Like on this piece of driftwood, I added a screw to the wood for help anchoring the epoxy clay permanently to the piece. Epoxy clay adheres stone, glass, ceramics, and metals beautifully, but doesn't stick well to polymer. But you can add some cyanoacrylate glue, superglue, to the polymer first if you want it to connect to the polymer clay. Page 60, do you see what I see? Dragonfly mosaic. This little dragonfly project is a great way to practice the cured polymer tesserae technique. Number one, the first thing you should do is make 2 or 3 thin sheets of colored polymer for the wings and body, and then bake them. Bake them for the full time if you want to make precise square rectangular tiles. Bake them for only about 10 or 15 minutes if you want to make rough irregular tiles. Now the reason for that is when polymer clay is baked fully, it's a plastic and you can cut and snip it with scissors and it'll be a nice crisp line. If it's underbaked, that 10-15 minutes, it's going to be brittle still. And so when you break it instead of try to cut it, it'll crumble into irregular shapes. Number 2, make the wings from a dark color of polymer clay. Just roll out balls of clay and form them into long teardrops and then flatten them with your finger. Make the rest of the dragonfly a long, thin log for the body, a round ball for the head, and smaller balls for the eyes. Press the head onto the body, eyes onto the head, and wings onto the body. Since the clay veneer sheets are baked, we'll need to use liquid clay to connect them to the unbaked form. Use a cotton swab to rub a thin coating all over the form of liquid clay. Scratch it! I like using the special scratch tool to rough up the surface of the clay and mix up the liquid clay and the polymer to form a textured paste-like surface. I have that tool on my website, and I'm also just doing a gentle scratch so I don't destroy the form. Next, use sharp little scissors to cut the veneer into teeny little tiles. Pick up the tile bits and press them onto the clay paste. You can use any kind of crystal picker tool, or even use the tip of a teardrop of raw polymer if you want. Tweezers will often work as well. Press the tiles enough so that they grab to the polymer paste. 8. Go with the flow. Follow the lines of the wings to maximize the design. Continue with a different color for the body. Bake your dragonfly. Now you can add a pin back if you want a sweet little brooch to wear, or you can add it to a larger creation. This dragonfly mosaic was made using the exact same steps, substituting epoxy clay for polymer clay and using rhinestones, glass tube beads, and stone chips instead of polymer clay tiles. Page 62. There was a kangaroo one too, but it hopped away. Aussie inspirations. Somewhere in Australia, I saw these delightful ceramic mosaics. All the sections of the platypus, echidna, and goanna were first created with ceramic clays, fire and glazed, and then assembled mosaic style. They were really cool. Turtle portal mosaic. Okay, this one's going to be fun. This turtle project is also a sculptural mosaic using cured polymer tesserae like the dragonfly, but there's another trick added. Translucent tiles inside resin. Pretty exciting, right? First, we will create polymer components of the sea turtle sculpture that will be covered with mosaic. This can be any size you want, of course. I made a big one. Start with number one, start with the shell, which is an oval shape flattened into a half dome. Number two, make flippers. Each front flipper is a teardrop. Squeeze the fat end into a stem-like knob. 3, attach the flippers onto the shell by pressing them to the underside at the front of the shell. Number 4, back legs are much smaller than the front, but also start as teardrops. Just make a short, fat teardrop and flatten it. Use your fingers to press 2 notches into the clay to make the toe shape. Yeah, turtles have toes. 5, the head is a little log with a pointy beak at the end. Just pinch a point in one end and then push the point down to make the beak. 6, attach the head to the front, the back legs to the back, and add a little snake for a tail. Press all the pieces to the underside as before and adjust the pieces to make it look like it's swimming. Okay, it's time to add the mosaics. Whee! The next part is the same process as the dragonfly. Cover a little bit at a time with liquid clay, scratch the surface, and then snip some baked sheets of clay into little tiles. I also cut some slices from a rolled cane, baked them, and added them to the clay sheets as part of my mosaic options. I suggest that you prep just the body parts first and then repeat the process for the shell after the body is done. Add an eye. I used a stone bead, wired and inserted into the clay. Not sure how to wire a bead? Zip to the back of the book for deets. Add small clay tiles around the eye to start. 9, add tiles to the rest of the body. Use those cane slices. I snipped all around the edges just for fun. Prep the shell and add polymer tiles to the shell too. Hint, cover a sheet of gold clay with gold leaf, bake it, and then cut circles to add to the shell. Some of the circles I cut into fractured pieces just because it seemed like a good idea. And little squares are great tiles too. Page 64. These techniques can be used for lots of other things. As we continue on our project, number 10, bake the completed turtle. Number 11, to make the translucent sheet for the resin tiles, use a brush to coat the center of a ceramic tile with a thick layer of liquid clay. 12, partially cure it using a heat gun or an embossing gun. Brush on another layer and sprinkle in mica powder or glitter. Partially cure this layer. Brush on one more layer of liquid clay and then bake it completely. 13, once it's cool, you can use scissors to cut the tiles from this translucent liquid clay. Are you ready to make the ocean circle portal? For this, I used thermoclear film because it's easy to manipulate into a clear, watery circle. I also used heat gloves so I could touch it while it was hot. If you don't have those, you'll just have to manipulate it with your tools. That will still work. Now, just a little mention is thermoclear is a product that I have carried on my site. And if you don't have that, you can play with this same look by using resin and saran wrap to make the crinkly stuff. So you could experiment around to get this idea anyway. But if you've got some of the thermoclear film, that can work out really well. Number 14, make the circle by heating strips of thermoclear and then squeezing and scrunching them to make a channel with the outside edge turned up to hold the resin later. Add new strips as needed by laying the edge of a new strip of thermoclear on the previous one and heating it until they melt together. Close the circle by heating the end onto the beginning. 15, to add color, brush some mica powder onto the surface of the film and then use the heat gun to set it. Page 65. Number 16, add a bottom to trap the resin within the ring. The easiest way is to use your heat gun to fuse a large sheet of thermoclear onto the bottom by cutting it larger and bending the edges up over the sides and fusing it all together. An alternative is to make a sheet from strips of wide tape, like clear shipping tape, stuck to each other side to side wide enough to press the ring onto. If you go this route, you'll need to pour a thin layer of air-dry resin on first Let it harden and then continue on. 17. Press the tiles onto the bottom of either the film or the resin. Add as many or as few as you like. I chose a circle and swirls pattern to accentuate the feel of water. The clay will naturally grab the plastic or the resin. Okay, just a heads up, you'll need to add the turtle to the resin when it starts to set up and is at the gummy stage, which is usually about 4 to 6 hours. So pour when you know you'll be around to do the next bit. 18. Mix your 2-part air dry resin and pour. Pour slowly so you don't move the tiles. Fill only to the lowest part of the ring or it will spill out. If any tiles moved, you can use a needle tool to adjust them. Another little hint, I found it very convenient to have a little bit of super glue, especially the kind that has a brush application, like a nail brush application. And you could put just a tiny little bit to hold the tiles in place, and then you won't have anything that moves with the resin. Number 19, once the resin has set up, as we discussed, lay the turtle gently on top of the resin and let him sink in by himself. No moving anything around at this point. Let the resin cure completely. If you want, when the piece is cured, you can frost both the top and the bottom with some super fine sandpaper. This will minimize any flaws on the surface and make the whole piece look a little bit more oceany. Use circular motions and a gentle touch. There's so much more to explore in the world of mosaics. Maybe I should write another book on that. Page 66. Clearly, it's a good thing. I can see clearly now. Sometimes we need a little clarity in our work. And by clarity, I mean a clear material. The philosophical clarity is also needed, but a little harder to add sometimes. Glass is an obvious choice when you're looking for a clear material. But glass can be tricky to manipulate, so here are a few other things to work with. Resin. It's a wonderful way to fill things or make transparent components. It's versatile and good for filling mold shapes too. Clear or translucent liquid polymer clay can be used similarly to resin, at least in thin applications, but it's not really good for thick applications. Oh, and it's flexible, unlike resin, which is rigid. So that opens up some interesting possibilities. Actually, it's not just flexible, it's stretchy, and as you already know, it's a good medium to dip and build up layers using a heat gun. Do you know about sheet mica? It's a clear mineral, so it can be baked in with polymer in your oven, and that's an interesting feature. It's naturally available in layers so that it can be peeled apart to make thin, clear sheets. You can easily cut mica sheets with scissors. You can't do that with glass or resin. Thin sheets of mica are flaky, but you can reinforce them by adding a layer of resin. Now that's a cool trick. And you've already been introduced to Thermoclear, which is a heat-reactive clear film. It's not rigid like resin or floppy like liquid clay or flaky like mica, but you can't pour it into a mold or easily add it directly to polymer. But it does offer some unique form of clear material that can be wrapped and layered, which is cool. Boy, we have a lot to choose from, don't we? Are we starting to see clearly now? Page 67. But no mer giraffes, for some reason. Let's talk mer creatures for a minute. Apparently, they're everywhere. We know about mermaids, obviously. Did you know that the mer lion is the national symbol of Singapore and that there are mer elephants in Bali? I've even spotted a mercat in my own studio. Here is a mer rodent. Cute, right? I bet you want to know how I got that natural-looking rocky pool of resin to keep from leaking while it was drying, huh? Start with a sheet of overlapping clear tape, sticky side up. Arrange your rocks in a natural way directly on the tape. Sprinkle clean, dry sand directly on the bottom, as thick or as thin as you like. This is just for decoration. It's not part of the trick. Now, mix up some silicone mold-making material and fill in the gaps. Press it down onto the tape, let it dry, pour in your resin. 2-part air dry resin. Ta-da! Leak-proof. Once the resin is fully cured, peel off the tape and pull off the silicone. That is all there is to it. Well, that's not all there is to it. What about making a little mer rodent? Look in the back of the book to find out more. I see textures. page 68 and 69. Never hug a cactus. Textures are everywhere. Everywhere. It's probably the thing you see the most, and maybe you don't even realize it. I've gotten into the habit of looking for texture. So now, of course, they jump out at me. Clay tobacco pipes, circa 1850s England. I love that bumpy one, don't you? Teddy bear chala, Southern California. Beware, if you grab them, they'll grab you back. Old millstones used as stepping stones, Hiroshima, Japan. Authentic wabi-sabi aesthetic. Caribbean Triton shell, Bahamas. Those ridges are so smooth and touchable. Palm tree pods, Hawaii. That would make a cool bead, wouldn't it? On your mark, get set, roll. Let's make texture rollerballs. There are lots of ways to make texture on your art. You can use tools to poke, scratch, and stroke. You can use molds and texture sheets. You can press things in or paint them on. Here's another fun way. Roll them on with texture balls. Mix up some epoxy clay. Roll it into a ball of any size. Press in items that will add interesting textures. Crystals, beads, chain, eyelets, tiny steampunk bits, glass flower beads, anything that will stick to the epoxy clay. Let the balls cure for at least 24 hours. I usually set the ball in a cup of the same kind of pieces so it won't get flattened or stick to anything. And those are little condiment cups, little plastic cups that are non-stick. So that's a good place to put your epoxy clay. When you use them, use a release like a spritz of water or a light dusting of powder to keep them from sticking to the surface of the clay. And then, laissez le bon temps rouler. Let the good times roll. 70. That's a lot of textures. Touch me texture thingies. Adding texture to your work is wonderful. It gives your piece a real touch me vibe. Let's just make some thingies with textures. These thingies can become brooches or pendants. You can use them as cabochons in wire wrap or bead embroidery projects, or incorporate them into mixed media assemblage. How about a bumpy, scratchy texture? Make a sheet of clay. Add balls, press them to attach. Cover with a thin sheet of clay. Push gently around each ball to attach and accentuate the balls. Cut to make a form, shape. Cover with powders. Use a scratch tool around the balls for a wonderful texture effect. I like that one. I think it turned out kind of cool. Do you clearly see what I see? Page 71. How about a holy texture? Start with a ball of clay. Press it onto a surface to make a half-round dome form. Use a ball-tipped tool to push deep holes into the entire surface, close together. Cover with powders. Use a tool to incise lines around the inside of the holes for contrast. Use additional powders inside some holes if you like. How about a layered texture? Number 1, roll out a thin strip of clay and cut into wide ribbons. Pinch one edge of a ribbon, so use your fingers just to pinch one edge more flat. 3, prepare the base by rolling out a sheet of clay, a little thicker is best, and then adding a small log of clay and press down with your fingers. Use a tool to smooth the log, making it more of a wedge shape. Lay on the ribbon with the pinched edge out. Curve it and add ripples. Pinch more ribbons and lay each one on top of the other, slightly down from the previous edge. Continue to add ripples. Once you have enough to your liking, use a blade to cut a shape. Tap your fingertip onto some mica powder and gently touch the surfaces of the layers to add shine to the edges. What other textured thingies will you come up with, I wonder? Page 72. Yo ho ho and a bottle of liquid clay. Let's be pirates. There's something kind of exciting about pirates. As we know from so many movies, pirates would fly their skull and crossbones flags, thereby alerting everyone of their intentions. Sidle alongside a merchant ship laden with cargo. Hop on board, usually there was a sword fight and some swooping around on ropes, grab a bunch of cool stuff, and then take off with the riches. Yo-ho, yo-ho. So what's being a pirate got to do with being an artist? Okay, so this analogy is going to break down, but stay with me. Like pirates, we artist types also fly a flag of sorts. We let people know that we are different in various ways, and we don't always follow the rules. Oh, and then there is often outrageous clothing, flamboyant hair, and lots of jewelry. Not as many swords among us artists, though. And what about plundering? Let's face it, both pirates and artists plunder. Pirates stole riches. It wasn't nice and people got hurt. This can happen in the art world too. Here are some pictures. New Orleans. I fell in with a band of pirates for the night. Don't worry, it wasn't a booty call. This is the day I will always remember as the day I almost caught Captain Jack Sparrow. This merry band of pirates was a joint project with artists in Mulranny, Ireland, which was once the home of the pirate queen Granuaile. That's her on the stern. We used some ideas we plundered from other artists, such as the idea of using driftwood for the boat construction and bones for the pirate limbs. Ahoy, there be ideas out there. Is it okay to plunder? Sometimes artists take other people's ideas, designs, patterns, and sometimes entire creations that don't belong to them, and folks can suffer. But can plundering be a good thing? I think it can if nobody gets hurt. Pirates don't care about that, but we artist types certainly should. You're plundering right now, you know? You're reading a book full of someone else's ideas and you're going to use them to make your own things. And of course, you know, I'm okay with that. In fact, I want you to. The thing is to realize that all creativity builds on other creativity. We see art everywhere in our whole lives and it informs what we make. We borrow knowingly and unknowingly. It's all about how we plunder. No ripping off, no taking, no absconding, and nope, not even any grabbing, but instead, let's be inspired. Let's mix up a variety of ideas to come up with your own version. Let's transform, remix, and above all, share. Here are a few of the pirate figures before we added them to the boat. We used polymer clay for head, hands, boots, and accessories. You can see we scavenged all kinds of materials to dress them. You never know when all those scraps of fabric, broken jewelry, and bits of yarn will be useful. That's why you should never ever throw out any craft supplies. Some of the best projects are collaborations. People share their ideas with each other directly, interacting, mixing it up. A real give and take situation. I think everyone should participate in a collaborative project at least once to broaden our expertise in and appreciation for sharing. This is the Mulranny crew working on the Pirate Queen project. Don't hoard your artistic plunder. Share the wealth. Share your ideas. Ooh, so many possibilities, page 74. Oh, wow, is it the end of the book already? I feel like we only just got started. Actually, that's what it should feel like. These ideas, techniques, and nudges are all intended to start your creative gears turning and help lead you down interesting rabbit holes, unexpected forest paths, intriguing corridors to rooms you didn't even know were there. Artistically speaking, of course, but maybe actually as well. Go on any adventure, try something new, take chances, say yes. Somewhere in England, or is it a corridor to creativity? Go ahead, say yes to opening up new doors of imagination. Staying inside comfortable places and making what you've always made is safe, but stepping out into artistic adventure is exhilarating. Go for it. So, where to from here? Onward, upward, anywhere word. Just create. Back of the book. Are you looking for all that back of the book reference material? Here it is. The next few pages are details about techniques, materials, and supplies that I've mentioned in this book. Sources for materials are on page 75. Want more? I've got lots of information as well as projects and interesting downloaded materials for free on my online Creative Neighborhood Facebook site. You should definitely check it out. Now, this one mentions the creativeneighborhood.com. Things have changed since this. So you can go to my Christie's Creative Neighborhood Facebook page for all those free things I mentioned. And then you can go to my website to see what are my latest groups and memberships that you can join. I've also got some pretty awesome purchasable tutorials and technique how-tos, ebooks, workshops, creative events online on my store. And for example, you've seen pictures of all these things in the book. They are all available as full tutorials online, and many more. Reference, page 76. Armatures and bases. We looked at using epoxy clay to add wire to a rock to make a base that can be built up with polymer clay. Since polymer clay doesn't shrink, you can work over just about any form: wires, foil, paper, duct tape. Use epoxy clay as a way to connect the skeleton of a piece to support extensions of polymer clay, as limbs, branches, whatever. But connecting with duct tape also works. Work your polymer over all the armature pieces and bake the whole piece, no problem. You can work polymer right over newly added epoxy clay, but I prefer to let it cure first, 24 hours, so it's solid and dependable. Bases just give weight and form to a piece. Rocks and glass are the most useful things to use. Chocolate. Unnecessary supplement for optimum creativity. Have some every day. Embellishments. Anything you can add to your main material is an embellishment. What can you add to polymer clay before baking? Anything that can go into the oven without melting during the curing baking process. Stones, crystals, natural pearls, glass, ceramic, metal, natural fibers like cotton, wool, and silk, and some woods and seeds. What you can't add: plastics, resins, lucite, anything that melts. Embellishments don't stick to polymer, so beads can be anchored into polymer with head pins or wire added through the holes. Wire can be wrapped around items without holes. Fibers can be attached with wire also, or added to holes in the clay filled with liquid clay. What can you add to epoxy clay? Almost anything. Plastics are problematic, but you can get around that by drilling holes in the end that gets inserted into the epoxy clay so that the epoxy clay will anchor through the hole. Otherwise, epoxy clay is an excellent way to use things that normally would be difficult to adhere, like sand, glass fragments, ceramic shards, tiny shells, stone chips. You get the idea. Epoxy clay. Speaking of epoxy clay, need to know all the basics? Essentially, all epoxy clays are two-part putties that combined in equal measure will air dry to make a rock-hard substance. Epoxy clay is an excellent adhesive. Use gloves and make sure there is good ventilation when using resins. I have a free video about using epoxy clay online here. Epoxy clay is in the resin family. And I don't even know if that link works anymore, guys, because things have changed since I made this book. But you can go to my YouTube channel where everything will stay up forever and ever, and it's got lots of stuff on epoxy clay. Findings. Whenever you make something that is going to be a piece of jewelry or a bead, usually you'll need to do something to make it wearable. For beads, the simplest thing is using a needle tool to pierce the unbaked clay to make a channel for the stringing material to go through after baking. Simple. Or making a wire loop and inserting that into the clay. Also simple. That's on page 44. Sometimes you want to create, then bake, then add a bail or a loop or a pendant, wall hanging, or a hinged straight pin to turn it into a brooch. I talked about adding a loop on the back for wall hanging on page 44. It's the same process for adding a pin back as well. And you can see there I've used a little liquid clay to attach a fresh bit of clay, sandwiching in that finding. Page 77, stuff to know. I find baking first is best, so there's no damage to the creation. Then you can use liquid clay to attach fresh polymer to hold the pin or bail in place and then rebake. Just a suggestion. If you use a pin back that also has a bail attached, the piece can be either worn as a brooch or a pendant. Choice is rule. Ear wires are attached with a jump ring to a loop or eye pin inserted into the clay prior to baking. Ditto for attaching a pendant to a chain. Adding wires, rings, hooks, or pin backs to an epoxy clay creation are super simple. After the epoxy is cured, mix up just a little more and add the finding to the back. Fresh epoxy sticks to dry epoxy easily. For resin pieces, you can do the same. More resin can be used to attach findings. Gold leaf. There is a difference between real gold leaf and gold-colored metal leaf. Both are used essentially the same, but real gold leaf is, well, real. I recommend real 23 karat or 24 karat gold leaf when you're doing sgraffito technique because it's what works. To add the look of gold, either product will work. To attach leaf to polymer, just lay it on the surface of unbaked polymer clay. Same process for epoxy clay. It can also be added to resin, either mixed into the resin when it's a liquid or laying it on the surface when the resin is at that firm gummy stage. Always get patent gold leaf instead of loose because the gold is attached to a carrier paper, making it much easier to use. Gold leaf sizing or adhesive is a liquid or spray glue made especially to attach real gold or silver leaf to dry materials like wooden canvas or paper. The only suggestion I could say is that if you're going to use gold leaf in resin, it's probably better to have it loose. Otherwise, it's going to be tricky to get the paper off if you're going directly into a wet resin. If you're pushing it on that gummy stage, no problem. Grandchildren, so much fun. Who knew? I'm going in alphabetical order in case you wondered. Heat gun, embossing gun, used to quick dry paints, flash your polymer, or heat manipulate thermoclear film. Hot fix rhinestones. This means that there is a heat activated glue on the back of the glass rhinestone crystal. It's great for use in polymer clay because you press them into the clay and then they will adhere themselves permanently when the oven activates the glue. Liquid clays. There are clear, translucent, and colored liquid clays. Each clay brand makes their own variety. Liquid clays are fluid versions of polymer clay and are not glues. Liquid clay is used for polymer clay to clay connection, as well as for connecting fibers to clay. When fiber is soaked in the liquid clay, it becomes enmeshed and then hard to remove, which acts the same as being adhered. Mold making with silicone. Silicone mold making material is the best way to make reusable molds for all materials. Polymer clay, epoxy, resin, as well as cement, paper clay, metal clays, and so much more. All silicone mold making materials are great. And the way to use them is always the same. Use 2 equal parts, mix thoroughly, press into position, and allow to air dry. For more details, take a look at my free video on mold making. And again, that will not link you there anymore, but you can go to my YouTube for some of that information. Powders. My suggestion about powders is use all of them. Mica powders, pigment powders, embossing powders, chalk powders, even glitters and pan pastel, a brand of powder that is creamier and more opaque than most chalk powders, and I love it so much. All can be brushed, swiped, or rubbed directly onto polymer clay and epoxy clay. All can be brushed onto thermoclear film and heat set to color the film. All can be mixed into resin to color and add visual interest. Polybonder is a cyanoacrylate glue, a super glue type, especially useful to helping attach things to polymer clay. That brand is no longer available at the time I'm telling you about this, so you can find any number of other super glues with that same nail brush application and they will work just as well. Polymer clay is a plastic material that acts like clay, as you already know by now. I love it. It is not air drying, but needs to be specific time at heat to cure into a flexible and durable material. Now, it's flexible when it's thin. When it's thick, it's not. But it in itself is a plastic that is flexible when it dries. If you are new to polymer clay, definitely go to my YouTube channel at Christy Universe and see my polymer basics videos to get a little bit more information, and especially about baking polymer clay. Overviews and explanations, page 78. There are several brands. All are lovely. We're talking about polymer clay here. My favorite and the brand that I used in this book is Primo, which is made by the Sculpey people. But whatever brand you use is going to be great. Polymer is usually conditioned before using, made soft and flexible by rolling and manipulating, and a regular oven is used to bake it. If you are new to polymer clay, check out the free videos I have on all the polymer clay basics. And again, there's that link that doesn't count anymore, but just go to my Christie's Creative Neighborhood page and on Facebook or my YouTube channel. Protective coating sealants glazes. Polymer clay resin and epoxy clay do not need to be sealed or protected, but sometimes it looks nice to have that final clear coating added when you've added surface treatments like powders, paints, or leaf, and they should be sealed to protect them from wear and tear if they're jewelry items, or protect them from dust or exposure if the metal coatings would tarnish like silver leaf, or swelligant metal coatings would continue to oxidize. Make sure to use a product compatible with the base material. For example, some varnishes, and pretty much all varnishes and glazes that are in the aerosol can, do not work with polymer or resin. Check the labels and always test on something that you can afford to toss if the varnish gets sticky, a sign that the two materials are incompatible. Swelligant sealant works on everything. So does Sculpey satin glaze. I love both of those too. Resin. There are two types of resin, air dry and UV curing. Both are awesome. Air dry is usually cheaper and it's best for pouring deeper amounts, especially if there are any parts that would be blocked from the light that is needed to cure UV resin. Air dry resin activates by mixing equal portions of the two parts. UV resin is less messy since it's pre-mixed, and it's wonderful for quick curing and building up layers of resin, a great way to add lots of embellishments to create the illusion of depth. UV resin cures with sunlight or with a UV light, like powders or resin dyes can be used to color all resins. Use gloves and make sure there is good ventilation when using resins. Silk screening. Silk screen process on polymer clay is simple. Paint, usually acrylic paint, is pressed through the spaces in the mesh with a wide brush or a stiff card to create an image on the surface. Studio. A must-have for all creatives. Even if it's a tiny table in the corner, you need your own space to make things that you never have to clean up unless you feel like it. Swelligant. Swelligant is a line of products meant to produce the look of metal on anything. It's especially made to create vintage oxidized metal and natural-looking colored metal. Because there's so much to say about how you use this product to make your creations metallicious, maybe it's better if you go take a look at my free information online and go to the Swelligant Facebook group and obviously my YouTube channel. Texture sheets. Any rubber sheet or stamp can be used with polymer clay or epoxy clay. A spritz of water makes a good release, so the sheet will pop off the clays easily. Dusting with powder will also work. Usually liquid clay can be poured on the sheet and it can go in the oven to cure for a short amount of time, 15 to 20 minutes. Then peeled off and baked again to cure fully. You can also pour resin onto a texture sheet and cure completely and then peel and use. Page 79, supply sources. Now, I'm going to read the words here, but supply sources always change. So I'm going to do the best I can to let you know if I know of new supply sources, all right? Thermoclear film, a thick plastic film that can be manipulated with heat to make forms that are semi-flexible, strong, and clear. Best colored with mica powders heat set onto the surface. Can be cut with scissors before heating, and the plastic can be reheated over and over to reform. That's something I carry on my site. Tools. So many things can be used as tools for working with polymer clay, epoxy clay, and resin. Here are a few of the should-have basics. Roller and or clay conditioning machine, a pasta machine. Oven, cutting blade, sculpting tools, sandpaper, needle tool, paint brushes, wire cutters, and pliers. Toothbrush, skewers, and or metal knitting needles, scissors, craft blade, ball tip tools, needle nose tweezers, toothpicks, cotton swabs, rubber gloves, wet wipes. Wire. Wire is used with all of the materials for support, anchoring, embellishments, and decoration. All wire works well. Gauges refer to the thickness of the wire. Wires are thinner as the gauge number gets higher. A 16 gauge wire is much thicker than a 28 gauge wire, for instance. 0. How often you will regret taking time to create. 0. That's how often you will regret it. Supply sources. I try to carry many of the tools, supplies, materials, and special items that I use for my own creativity on my online store, so you should check there first for the things from this book that you might want to find at christyfriesen.com. But here are a few sources for things that I've mentioned that are not in my store. The wooden canvas. It's a product that's often called a cradled wood painting panel or wood canvas, and you can try many of the fine art supply stores like MrArt.com. Mosaic supplies. I carry some, of course, but you may also want to look for interesting china and other kinds of pottery and plates and things to smash into shards from your local thrift store, charity shop, op shops. Glass tiles can be found at stained glass supply stores. Tesserae Smalti and Millefiori tiles can be also found at mosaic supply stores. Jewelry findings. There are a lot of places to buy jewelry findings. Try your local bead store first, because I'm just going to leave it at that. Always support your local bead stores if you can. Ice resin. This is a great air dry resin. You can find it online. many places, Amazon, but you can also go to Ice Resin directly. Polymer clay, find polymer clay at most craft stores, but also get Primo online directly from the source at Sculpey.com. There's a number of different places too. I didn't mention UV resin, but there's a number of places you can find that as well. Some of the ones that I have used have changed, so I'm not going to give you a direct source for that. You'll just look that up and look for recommendations from other artists. All right, last page. So, would you like to make your own Mer rodent? Of course you would. Well, I added the full downloadable tutorial on my site, and you can get it here. And since you bought this book, I think you deserve a special coupon code to get it for half the regular price, don't you? So at checkout, you can use this code for the discount. And here's the code. DUSWIS. Do you see what I see? Dash half. HALF. If you like this book, there are also other books that I've written that you might want to check out. They are now available as ebooks on my site. Most of them are no longer paper copies available. You can always get the ebooks. Okay, so that's it. That's the book. Now, I have a little about the author here. I'm going to tell you it, but you've already spent time with me, so you know about me, right? About the author, Christy Friesen, moi. Christy Friesen is a bit of a weirdo, but because she's an artist, it's okay. She likes going places and looking at things and then making things from what she sees and then telling everyone about them, even if they didn't ask. She's a mixed media artist specializing in embellished polymer. Doesn't that sound fancy? If you met her on the street, she'd probably stop to say hi, especially if you had some chocolate. And then this is the back of the book. This would stop you if you picked it up in a bead store to entice you to see if you wanted to buy it. But I'm going to finish our little chat here on Do You See What I See? By just giving you the summation of what we just read together. Would you like a hands-on look at creativity? Do You See What I See is a little philosophical, a little storytelling, a lot making, with creative suggestions, ideas, techniques, and how-to step-by-step projects. The book is a sketchbook, travel journal, creative guidebook all in one. Entertaining, enlightening, and written in Christie's conversational style, the humor and easy instructions will ensure that this book has a special place in your studio and in your heart. Polymer clay is the main focus of the projects and techniques, but epoxy clay, resin, and other materials make frequent appearances to give you a well-rounded mixed media vibe. Any person who values creativity will find this an interesting read. And I hope you found it not only an interesting listen, but you will also be able to have the PDF of the book. So it can be an interesting read as well. Thanks. I really appreciate you letting me tell you all the things, and happy seeing, happy creating.